people these days seem to be very like agnostic about their values. Like, it's not like there's like a standard set of like moral values that everybody's trying to follow. I feel like, you know, back when I was a kid, everybody was kind of on the same page generally about what's like morally acceptable and, you know, good. Or like on a closer page, you know, there's always been the different religions and different people with different values, but like just morally, like what's acceptable. And it seems like these days people are like, yeah, like, you know, this is what I believe and it could be right, it could be wrong. This is what I believe, it could be right, it could be wrong. And like there's no standard. It seems like there's no standard anymore for what's even just good or bad, right? What's good and evil. It's been a very confusing time.
The more traditional values erode, I think the more and more they tend to sound and look like ancient things that people don't understand anymore. And so when rules just become rules for the sake of rules, they also lose their meaning. And I think the less they get passed on, the less understanding a lot of people have, and then the more distance people become from them and think that they're nonsense, right?
That they're irrelevant.
Yeah.
They have no place in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like at the school that I teach at, there's a large, mainly Muslim population, but there's lots of fairly, I would say, religious people, a variety of religions. And so while there's not a lot of Christian morality, there's a lot of religious morality. So it's not always exactly the same, but I feel like it's closer to what I believe than what you might get in a lot of other places. So it's an interesting thing that I feel like I often, have great conversations with some Muslim students, and you know, we have a lot in common.
I think there is like a lot that you know, Muslim families they care about, like these traditional family values and moral values, and align on a lot of that stuff. And I think that's why they're similar.
You know, the pride. That's always been a challenge for me. Every year around that time, they want to put up the pride flag and want people to participate in the photo shoot, and that causes me a lot of anxiety every year around that time, because I don't want to participate. But I say, well, what if I don't participate? Will I be, something happen to me? Like, it shouldn't happen, right? We have freedom of choice and that, but it's still in the back of my mind. If I don't participate in that photo shoot, will I be singled out?
There's so many different kinds of people in my school, so like really nobody has the same values almost, because I'm going to be honest, I don't really know anybody at my school who I would think has the same values as me.
So I think part of this, what I'll call it diversity, is good. Actually, you know, I grew up in a white Anglo-Saxon kind of communities, and you know, everybody who didn't fit that mold was bad. I mean, even French Canadians were thought to be a suspect, whatever. But I think the pendulum has swung too far the other way now, and I'm hoping that actually it will swing back to find a more neutral ground where some of these things will be accepted but not promoted.
I'm hopeful as well, Gary. I do feel like while the pendulum will always swing, and it's always going to swing back and forth, and I feel like whatever's currently accepted will always be challenged in the future. So I kind of feel, to a certain degree, there is natural stuff. I mean, Satan is always at work trying to distract, like you were saying, but I do feel like there's this natural pendulum swinging back and forth, and what's encouraging to me is that's the rock of God that we've got to stand on, right? We can always look to the Bible, and so while that pendulum vacillates back and forth and people are lost, I feel like it breeds anxiety. You know, a lot of people are so uncertain because they don't know where they fit in and how they fit in, and they're being told all these different messages. I do feel like that's the truth that we've got, the hope that we've got, is to stand on the rock of God.
Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. I grew up in rural Nova Scotia, as many of you know. I went to church twice every Sunday and every Wednesday night for prayer meeting. But I did not learn the Lord's Prayer, you might be interested to know, at church. I actually learned it in my public school. Every morning, we began by reciting the Lord's Prayer and singing the national anthem. Things have changed a lot in the last 50 years. I can't believe I'm using that number, but it really has changed. Welcome back to Future Proofing Your Family. This is a 5-week series designed to help you and your family make the most of your future by using biblical wisdom. So that's what we're looking at. And last week we began by talking about just economic difficulties. Today we're going to continue with the erosion of traditional values. You know, for centuries, parents have had the same conversations with their kids, right? About how life was so different back then versus how it is now. And it's a product of the facts that civilization is constantly changing, along with the fact that we're all getting older all of the time. And when we analyze how life has changed in just 70 or so years that we're allowed to be here on this planet, that we get to experience personally, we're actually looking at a very, very small cross-section of human history. We have to always remember this, right? But our tendency is to ignore the greater cultural currents that were flowing long before we came along and that are going to continue to flow after we have gone. In other words, to some degree, we're all products of the day and age in which we find ourselves. I'm digging into a book that was referred to me by Darcy McCallum, one of our elders. It's called The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self by a guy named Carl Trueman, where he analyzes the larger forces at play over the last 300 years or so that have led to the modern concept of self, to the modern concept of identity. It's a fascinating book. Rod Dreher, who's the author of a book called Live Not by Lies, you may have heard of him, is Trueman's friend, and he actually was invited to write the foreword to the book. Listen to what he says. In his 1983 Templeton Prize address, Alexander Solzhenitsyn offered this summary explanation for why all of the horrors of Soviet communism came to pass. Men have forgotten God. That's why all of this has happened. Rod Dreher goes on to say in the foreword, this answer is also a valid explanation for the crises enveloping the West today, including the widespread falling away from faith, the disintegration of the family, a loss of communal purpose, erotomania, erasing the boundaries between male and female, and a general spirit of demonic destruction that denies sacredness of human life. Because men have forgotten God, they have also forgotten man. That's why all of this has happened. Well, I think it's a statement that many churchgoers would be inclined to agree with, but then Dreher goes on to say, we have to go deeper. We have to understand why things are the way they are. And so in this book, Trueman goes back 300 or so years and chronicles all of the influences that have kind of brought us to where we are today. And it's very insightful. It's a very worthwhile study. I would encourage anyone to pick up a copy of the book. Well, we're talking about traditional values. I want to start today by asking the question, what traditional values are we talking about? What are the values here that we're referring to? Dreher actually just named a bunch of them in that quote. He talked about the falling away from Christian faith, right? The disintegration of the family unit, a loss of communal purpose, right? We don't have this shared purpose. You heard that in the video today. Erotomania, which is basically the love of sexual pleasure. We see that everywhere today. The elimination of gender distinctions. And then he uses the word demonic, basically culture of death that includes so many different things: abortion, suicide, murder, drug use, assisted suicide. All of these things are just growing in our society today. We already acknowledged that our, day and age is part of a greater cultural stream that has been flowing, but things have changed so much just in the short time that we've been around that even in this short period of time, we can kind of see that things have really moved a lot. Just in the, last 50 years that I've been around, we can see how much traditional values have eroded. We understand, of course, that access to media is influencing our perspectives on all of these things, and sometimes they can make us think things are worse than they actually are. But we also know that things that we're seeing today are just unprecedented to anything that we've seen just in our lifetime. And so we can't deny the slide that is taking place. Just this week, there are a couple of issues that are so crazy that I hesitate even to mention them. Some of you have heard of Gisèle Pellicot, who's now quite famous, a French woman who was raped by 51 men at the hand of her own husband who was drugging her. If you haven't read the story, it is insane to even consider. Many of you are probably aware of rapper P. Diddy, who has been charged with sex trafficking, racketeering conspiracy, transportation to engage in prostitution, basically treating hundreds of women like trash, if you just want to put it into easy English. That's basically what he's being charged with. And apparently, a lot of other rappers could be implicated in this as well, which is really shocking because, rappers historically have been so respectful toward women. Anyway, sorry, I shouldn't make light of this. I could obviously spend all morning demonstrating how sexual perversion has just exploded in our society. But we've seen so many other signs of this erosion of values as well. There's just no more respect for authority, it seems. Everywhere you look, people are down on authority. We have no ability to discipline children in our schools, and the government would even go so far as to stop us from doing it in our homes. There's a spirit of lawlessness that is growing. Just last week, my wife comes home after a shift at work, and she said, I couldn't believe it. I had to go outside and stop a whole group of kids. They were throwing donuts at the window of the restaurant, right? Now, this isn't after hours. This is while people are eating in the restaurant. They're throwing donuts. She had to go out and say, what are you doing? Now, kids have always been kids. We know this, right? But there just seems to be a whole other level. There's progressive ideologies and lifestyles that are being pushed on our kids. As you heard in the video, right? It's not just enough to celebrate, a day. It's Pride Month, right? And everybody is kind of being forced to kind of get on board with this or greatly pressured to. The traditional value of sobriety is giving way to a culture of drug-induced numbness. This is just kind of how society is moving. We just kind of numb ourselves by a number of different, methods. Basic traditional values, even just like kindness and humility, seem to be in shorter supply than they used to. Just that polite hello, thank you, and so on. Well, it has many Christians wondering if we might be in the last days. There's this passage in 2 Timothy chapter 3 that you may be familiar with. It says, Paul says, understand this, in the last days there will come times of difficulty, for people will be lovers of self, lovers of money, proud, arrogant, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, heartless, unappeasable, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not loving good, treacherous, reckless, swollen with conceit, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having the appearance of godliness but denying its power. Now, if you're new to church, you should understand that the Bible teaches that Jesus is actually coming back to set up his kingdom here on earth, and that those who are ready for him to return, who are eager for his return, will enjoy that kingdom with him. And as you can see from this verse, that may be happening way sooner than people think. Well, I want to ask this question today as we kind of move through here. What has caused these values to erode? What is it that's taken place that has, caused us to go on this slide and very precipitously within the last 50 years or so? Well, I want to go back to this book that Truman wrote. He demonstrates in this book that it's been a slow decline over many, many years. And it's actually been a progression, and it's actually helpful to kind of understand what's taken place. And it goes way back to the Enlightenment, right? So in the 16 to 1800s, this was the era that kind of arose where, reason became emphasized after the Dark Ages. And it actually paved the way for the triumph of the Christian faith. But at the same time, what it did was it eroded the foundations of it because it replaced God with reason. After the Enlightenment, right, we had people like Jean-Jacques Rousseau that came along who believed that people are naturally good and that society is what corrupts them. The Romantic period followed the Enlightenment, and poets like Wordsworth and Shelley had great influence. They built on Rousseau's ideas, emphasizing individual emotion and creativity and self-expression. They celebrated the self as the source of truth rather than God. And this is what happened in Europe. Then came the Industrial Revolution, right? With all of the advancement, we got to the point where we could mass produce things. And it really disrupted the rhythms of the traditional family unit. It really increased individualism as people began working on at these different schedules and different paces. It had a huge impact on the family. Karl Marx, of course, came shortly after this, and he shaped the ideas about identity being influenced by social and economic forces. And his ideas are still very much adhered to today, especially in academia. Charles Darwin came along. He saw self as a product of evolutionary processes, separate from any divine purpose or meaning. This had a huge impact. And the moment that this ideology started creeping into schools, when I was just, a kid, it's really transformed Western society. Friedrich Nietzsche dismissed the existence of objective moral truths. He said that individuals create their own identities, that they create their own values. Again, he's just now developing the ideas that have already been laid down in front of him. And finally, we get to Sigmund Freud, who argued that sexual and psychological drives are what actually shape human identity. And so when you look at all of these different people and movements and forces, you can kind of see how we've moved toward where we are today. All of these forces impacted Europe first. North America was a little bit insulated because of the Atlantic Ocean, but these ideals eventually crossed the ocean and transformed our society here as well. Reason continued to replace God and the Bible. Industrialization and urbanization weakened community and the family. Freud's sexual theories fueled a burgeoning therapeutic culture in America, where everybody was, kind of eating up these ideas as they were getting this therapy from, psychotherapists. American universities, media, and popular culture became key vehicles for transforming European intellectual ideas. In the sexual revolution in the 60s, Freud's ideas about sexuality and identity, they were brought right out into public life, and people started embracing them wholeheartedly. And with all of our prosperity here in North America, consumerism and individual choice continued to rise all during this time. And it all resulted in a term that Truman has coined that is expressive individualism. This is the term that he's come up with. The idea that the highest goal in life is to express and validate one's inner feelings and desires. That shift replaced traditional moral and religious values with the pursuit of personal autonomy and self-fulfillment. Do you see the shift that took place? Truman says that this is now the worldview that has replaced Christian worldview in North America. Guys, this is the reason why a child will be affirmed in gender transition and reassignment surgery in rejection of all reason. We've moved beyond reason now, right? This is why people will allow biological males to compete against females, or why tampons are being placed in men's washrooms, like completely ridiculous ideas that are contrary to reason. This is how we got here, and it's important to understand. Expressive individualism is the new religion. Well, what impact has this had on the family? Well, it's obviously been pervasive. It completely affects the family. The family, by definition, is not individualistic, right? In a family, you're living in community with other people. And so this individualism has been very destructive. The decline in belief of God has resulted in the loss of divine purpose and an absolute standard for morality. You heard that in the video today. The decline in church attendance means there's been a loss of moral teaching and also just a loss of community. Guys, sometimes we take for granted what we have here as a church community. We have something very wonderful and powerful that most people do not experience anymore. It actually impacts people's mental health to not have that kind of communal experience. Secularism has expunged Christian influence and morality pretty much from every sphere, whether it's schools or politics or the media. It's kind of marginalized Christian ideas and values. The family's been redefined. Authority is breaking down. Sexual boundaries are completely rejected at this point. And our embrace of expressive individualism means that everywhere you look, individual preference, no matter how bizarre it may seem, is going to take precedence over values held by the broader community. This is why you will have kids in schools today that people are literally bringing them in litter boxes because they want to believe that they're cats, right? I wish that was a joke, but this is where we're at. And I hear a lot of people talking about this, not just religious people anymore. This is the interesting thing. And it's an unfamiliar feeling for me to hear so many people openly agreeing with Christian values all of a sudden. Is anyone else experiencing this? All of a sudden, people are like, talking about Christian values like they're their values. They're starting to realize, oh, some of those things that Christians believe, that's more what I believe, not some of this new stuff that we're seeing. So I'm not discouraged. I think that people are actually starting to wake up. In fact, we're seeing signs that people are starting to push back a little bit. York Catholic District School Board's recent decision not to fly the pride flag is just one example of, even larger groups starting to push back. Some of you maybe attended the 1 Million March for Children last year that protested the imposition of gender ideology in schools. Huge numbers of parents are now keeping their kids home during Pride Month celebrations. Here in Ontario, very often the percentage is like 40 to 50% of parents are keeping their kids home during these activities and celebrations. It's being very disruptive. Parents are becoming more engaged in general. A recent Leger-Fraser Institute poll showed that 81% of Ontario parents agreed that schools should provide advance notice when controversial topics will be discussed in class or during formal school activities. That's a huge percentage, 81%. And so there's a bit of a pushback. I want to ask this question: what wisdom does the Bible bring to bear on all of this stuff? Right? Because I've laid out for you, this is where we're at. This is the controversy. This is the tension that we're all feeling. What does the Bible actually bring to bear on this? We're actually really blessed to live in a country where our system of government and laws were built upon the foundation of Judeo-Christian thought. It's something that we've taken for granted for decades now. When we use the term Christian values, most people kind of jump to like the 10 Commandments, but it's actually way, way bigger than that, and I want you to understand that today. The 10 Commandments are 10 specific, rules that God gave us, but the Bible also gives a framework for how to best understand the world, how to best understand life, how to understand humanity and humans' part in this planet. Like it's much broader than just some rules for living. And so quickly, I want to give you 10 values that actually helped shape North American culture. 10 Christian values that people take for granted all of the time. But when you see them, you go, oh, yeah, that's true. That comes right from here. Number 1, there is one God, right? You say, well, that seems so basic. No, but it's huge. It has a huge impact, right? This is the God that the Bible describes to us. Secondly, there are objective moral truths just as there are objective mathematical and scientific truths. Without God, there is no moral truth, right? There are only moral opinions if there's no God. But the fact that there's one God and that there is objective moral truth, right? This is huge for us to understand. Number 3, because there are moral truths, good and evil are the same for everyone. There's not my truth or your truth. There is only the truth. This is so important to understand. Number 4, God is the source of our rights, not man, not government, not popular opinion, not even a democratic vote, as much as we've been led to believe that. God is the source of your rights. The preamble to the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, part of the Constitution Act of 1982, reads this. It says, whereas Canada is founded upon principles that recognize the supremacy of God and the rule of law. Do you know that? That's actually in our documents. We talk about the Declaration of Independence, right? One nation under God. We have it in ours too. Number 5, the human being is created in the image of God. You say, well, what are the implications? There's so many implications. That means that every human life is precious. That means that race is of no significance because God has no race, right? This means that male and female distinctions are more than just a construct. They are actually divine because when God created us in His image, He said, male and female, I created them. So these have huge implications. Number 6, man is not basically good. This flies in the face against naive modern belief. Because man is not basically good, we need God-based rules to keep us from our natural inclinations, and we need a society that upholds these rules, and a legal system that upholds these rules, and a police force that upholds these rules. Number 7, our natural inclinations are a very poor moral guide. The Bible says this over and over again. Jeremiah, right? The heart is deceitful and wicked above all things. And so don't follow your heart. People do great evil when they think their hearts are better guides than God's rules. Number 8, human beings have free will and therefore are responsible for how they behave. We are responsible. Now, in a secular world, free will does not actually exist because all human behavior is the result of biology and environment. And where there is no free will, there can be no real responsibility. And so you see a lot of people kind of falling into that category today. They're like, well, you just have an opinion about what's right, and, you can't really hold me to anything. Plus, I don't really have a free will because I'm just the product of biology and the environment. Number 9, the 10 Commandments give us a formula for a just and a safe society. As a wise man once said, if everyone just lived by the 10 Commandments, we wouldn't need armies or even the police. You realize that? If everyone would just live by the 10 Commandments. There's a reason why we used to teach them in our schools, because they're just really good principles for having a good society. And finally, number 10, the teachings of Jesus go beyond justice to joy, fulfillment, and peace with God. Jesus taught the most revolutionary ideas: to love your enemies, to turn the other cheek, the golden rule, to do unto others as you would have them do unto you, that the poor are blessed, that we should forgive unconditionally, that the greatest among you will be your servant, that we should be laying up treasure in heaven, not on earth, that it's more blessed to give than it is to receive. Do you understand how revolutionary these ideas are? They fly in the face of everything that our society teaches. Everything. And as we forget God, as we forget the teachings of Jesus, we're moving away from these, and we're seeing the result in our society. Most of all, Jesus taught us that by placing our faith in Him, we can actually be reconciled to God. Parents, let me ask you, who is teaching your kids a Christian worldview and Christian values? Who's doing it? I can guarantee that for the most part, your kid's school is not. If you're going to future-proof your family, you need to have a plan. You need to have some kind of plan set up for how you're going to accomplish this. So this brings us to the question, what practical steps can I take to future-proof myself and my family? We're talking about future-proofing in this series. This is what this is all about, and it should be very practical for you. Carl R. Truman, the one who wrote this book, says, the task of the Christian is not to whine about the moment in which he or she lives, but to understand its problems and to respond appropriately to them. So let's move past the whining. Let's get practical and say, how are we going to deal with this? Number 1, teach your kids a healthy fear of God, of the law, and of authority. All right? Teach them. Lovingly discipline your kids. Give them consequences. Respect for authority begins at home. That's where kids learn it. And if they don't learn it there, they're going to go out into the world not respecting it. Number 2, teach your kids biblical morality. The church can help, and we will help, but you are responsible for teaching your kids biblical morality. You have to be able to combat a lot of what they're getting at schools now. You actually have to take some time to unteach things that they're being taught, but you have to be on top of it. Obviously, if you're going to teach it to your kids, you have to learn it first. The church can help. We offer classes. We'll meet with you. We'll teach. You can attend our services. We'll do everything we can to help you, but it's on you. Number 3, teach your kids the heart behind the rules. Come to understand the heart of God behind His rules and help your kids see God's love behind everything. Sometimes Christian parents are guilty of just like pushing rules on their kids. No. Help them understand this comes from a loving God who wants to bless you, who wants your life to be good. Right? You're going to have to impart this idea to your kids because they're not being taught that anywhere, that there's a good and loving God who gives us these rules for your betterment. Number 4, be aware of everything that is influencing your child's moral development. Everything. Guys, listen, know the music that they're listening to. Know what they are looking at online. Help them to choose their friends. I didn't say just know their friends. Help them to choose their friends and to unchoose some of them too, right? Know what is being taught in their school. Pay visits to their teachers and principals. And be in open conversation with them every day about the things that they're hearing, the things that they're being taught. You have to do this if you're going to survive, if your kids are going to be future-proofed. And finally, number 5, be actively engaged in Christian community, in your church life. You were not meant to do this alone. Find people in life who are traveling in the same direction, because we're here for each other, guys. This is what we're here for. And as days get darker, we need each other more and more, right? I want you who have good Christian values, I want you influencing my kids as well, right? We need this kind of cross-pollination, different voices, different people all working together and pushing in the same direction. Well, I want to spend the rest of the time that I have left here this morning giving a word to concerned but non-religious people. And I'm going to look directly to those that are watching from home today, because I know that many of you watch, but you don't come out, but you're watching, and I know that a lot of people are checking this stuff out. But there are a lot of people who would not consider themselves church people or Christians or even religious, but they are concerned, and so I want to address those people, and some of you are here at the theater today. I want you to know that the chaos that you are seeing is the fruit of a godless, secular society. This expressive individualism, this is where it comes from. You see, when you reject one religion, when humans reject one religion, we just replace it with another one. This is how we're made. We're religious by nature. So if we reject one, we're just going to replace it with something else. And there are other religions that you could turn to instead of Christian faith, but many of them are oppressive and controlling. Guys, listen, this is what Jesus said. He said, I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. That's Jesus' statement. That's what Jesus is saying he came for, to give us abundant life. Now, maybe you've had negative church experiences. I'm sorry if that's true. It does happen. I acknowledge that. But you have to look at the bigger picture, right? I've had a number of car accidents. I don't stop driving a car. I need to get around still. History shows very clearly that the Christian worldview has rendered the most free and prosperous societies that have ever existed in the world. Do your research. Just get a map and look at the countries that have been Christianized and compare how they've done through history versus the ones that haven't. It's a very simple exercise, actually. But the more that we lose the Christian worldview here in North America, the lower we are going to fall. And I don't expect the whole society here to return to Christian values. I'm not naive, but if you're listening today, I hope that you at least will consider the appeal that I'm making here, right? I'm going to make an appeal. I know that you've been conditioned to see Christians a certain way, as unscientific, as backward, as intolerant. I've seen that since the time I was a kid. I remember watching different movies and stuff, or television, or listening to different music growing up. And I'm like, why are Christians always being portrayed this way? Like that wasn't the Christians that I knew were not like this at all. Well, there is an evil one who works overtime to sell that narrative. But as our society plummets into chaos, people are starting to wake up. They're starting to see the truth. Let me ask you very openly today, what is it that keeps you from joining Team Jesus? What are you afraid of? What are you afraid of? Many people, I understand, they want to remain neutral. They don't want to be labeled as being a religious person. But then on the other hand, now they're discovering, but I don't want to be part of this woke crowd either, right? The craziness. And so what's happening is they find themselves now in no man's land. They're kind of in between the two. And while they're standing there in no man's land, their kids are being picked off, right? Because they don't have anything to offer them. This is actually what's taking place. Their kids are being destroyed. See, guys, you can't live in a moral vacuum. You have to embrace something. We talk a lot today about gender being binary, right? Christians, we push that a lot because that's the truth, right? That's what the Bible shows. That's what life shows. But did you realize that faith is also binary? Did you know that? That whenever you look in the Bible, it presents faith as being binary. Take a look here, actually. This is what the Bible shows. Next slide. The Bible shows that you're either for Jesus or you're against Jesus. It shows that you're either submitted to God or you're in rebellion against God. That you're actually in the light or you're in the darkness, that you're spiritually alive or you're spiritually dead, that you're a child of God or you're a child of the devil, Jesus even used that term, that you're on a path to heaven or on the path to hell, that you're a friend of God or you're an enemy of God. The Bible is actually very binary when it comes to this matter. And it blows my mind how many people know intrinsically that life with Jesus is better, but they'll allow some frustration or misunderstanding or experience that they had in the past to keep them living separated from God, living still in the darkness, living as an enemy of God. It blows my mind. And so what comes to my mind, if you're one of those people, here's what you really need. You need a prodigal son moment. This is what you need. If you have ever studied the story in the Bible, the prodigal son, right? He grew up in a wonderful household. His father had all kinds of wealth, but his son rebelled against his father and took what was his and his inheritance, and he goes off and squanders it in riotous living, right? He just goes off and blows it all. He wastes it all. He takes all of the father's blessings, but he rejects the father himself. And then one day, eventually, he's, right, feeding the pigs because he's lost all his money. He's there, and he's saying to himself, he has this wake-up kind of moment where he realizes, what am I doing here? My father has so much. I could go and be with him. He would welcome me in a heartbeat. What am I doing here? He has this wake-up moment. So he humbles himself and he comes back to the Father. Guys, this is the exact thing that you need if you're in this situation. Our nation, as a whole nation, is like this boy. We've been living off of the Father's blessings, but rejecting him. That's a beautiful description of Canada. We've been living off of God's blessings, but rejecting him. And now the blessings are running out because we've cut ourselves off from the source. And we're looking a lot like this guy. Let me ask you, will you really let pride keep you from embracing Jesus completely? Will you really let that happen? You already believe so much of what we Christians believe. Think about this. You value the importance of community. You believe that we are all created equal, that we have intrinsic human rights. That's what Jesus taught. That's why we have that. You agree with the concepts of good and evil. You're not bought into this relativism that's going through the age. I hear so many people say, no, there are things that are just right and wrong. You believe the same thing that we do. You love the ethics of Jesus, the ideas of loving your neighbor, of the golden rule, of personal responsibility. You appreciate the sexual boundaries even of Christianity. Yeah, I know a lot of people like to play on the edge, but overall they appreciate those values, the values of family, of one man with one woman, of being maritally faithful. Even if people fail in that, they understand that it's a good thing. You love the sanity of Christianity. The Christian people that you know, they actually believe that there's two genders, that marriage is for a man and a woman, that you shouldn't have men cleaning up in women's sports, like just stupid, obvious things that we share common ground on. You agree that people should be kind and hospitable and fight injustice and help people who are in need. Guys, all of these are Christian values. These are the values that Jesus taught us. They come from a Christian worldview that you've taken for granted. These are the things that made Canada truly great and that you love. All that's left is for you to get on Team Jesus. Why aren't you doing that? He's the one who showed us all of this. I rack my brain trying to think, what is it that keeps people? Maybe you still think that Christians are the weird ones. I'm telling you, we're not the weird ones. We're not, right? Years ago, I used to think, what do people think? That like Christians make you wear like really weird hats or something? Or holy underwear? I don't know. Like, what is it that they think? They seem to think that we're so weird. Other people think that, Christians have no fun. Christians are the funnest people I know. We have so much fun at our church. That's pretty much all we do is have fun all the time. Is this true? It's so true. That's all we do. Just have fun. People say, well, the church is going to take all my money. We just learned last week. The church actually teaches you how to make the most of your money, how to good principles for earning money, for saving money, investing money, and actually then how to be generous with it. And so that you can be fulfilled in your life. Like literally everything that you believe is what the Bible is teaching. You can have maximum joy by following Jesus' ways in these things. So I racked my brain. I said, maybe it's about control. Maybe you just don't want to give up control of your life, but maybe your life doesn't have as much life in it as you think, right? Because Jesus actually taught to find real life, you need to lose yours. And so you're holding on to this life that you think is so good, and it's really not that good. It's true that anyone can live a better life by following Jesus' wisdom, right? He offers it freely. And so you're like, I'm not gonna embrace Jesus, but I'll just kind of, I'll benefit from these things that he's taught. But listen, guys, you can do that, but that doesn't mean that you're spiritually alive. In 1 John chapter 5, John says, and this is the testimony that God gave us eternal life, and this life is in his Son, Jesus. Whomever has the Son has life. Whoever does not have the Son of God does not have life. You might think you have something good going on. You don't have life. You're spiritually dead. And somewhere deep inside, you know that you are. Do you have the Son? Have you embraced Jesus? Or are you just taking advantage of his blessings? God wants so much more for you. He's like the father of the prodigal son. He wants to be with you. Do you understand? This is why Jesus died, so that you can be with God again, that you can be reconciled to God, that you can feel the power of the one who created the universe coursing through your veins. He also wants to be the foundation of your life. Maybe many things are going well for you and your family right now. I am very glad to hear that, if that's true. But all of our families are going to go through hard times. It's going to happen. And your foundation is going to be tested. I'll end with this verse in Matthew chapter 7. Jesus said, everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who has built his house on the rock. And the rain fell and the floods came and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand, and the rain fell and the floods came and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. Guys, the life that is not founded on Jesus is vulnerable. And it will fall in this life or the next. It will fall. What I'm inviting you today is to future-proof your life and the life of your family. Let me pray for you. Father, we need you. Our society around us is falling into darkness. It's falling into chaos, because we've rejected you. Lord, may we be the people who clearly stand for Jesus, who acknowledge that Jesus came to give us life, abundant life, that we would not be ashamed or embarrassed, regardless of what people may say of us. Lord, Satan is just keeping people blinded. But the more we go down the path that Satan lays out, we just see this is just chaos and destruction. He's blinding people. Lord, I pray if anyone is here today that hasn't embraced Jesus, that hasn't understood that he died on the cross for their sins so that they could be united to God, that this would be the day that they place their faith in him. Lord, help each one, I pray, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Join us every Sunday at 10 a.m. at Cineplex Cinemas in Milton. Or visit us online at renewchurch.ca/connect.